questions together so I wouldn't forget anything. That's okay. Okay, are we ready to start? My name is Shelley and I am a mom of 5. I have been homeschooling for 20 years. I have 4 kids who have special needs. I have graduated 3 of them, and they're functioning adults, so I think maybe I did something right somewhere along the way. But when I started doing this, 20 years ago, there was not a whole lot of help for me, so I just read a lot of books and figured stuff out and screwed some things up and didn't screw some other things up, and my kids still talk to me. So I think that's a good thing. So I just wanted to share with you guys what I have done, what I have learned, and I would hopefully be able to answer some questions that you might have as we go through. So first thing I want to say is that you absolutely can do this, and I meet parents all the time who are like, there's no way I can do this. Yes, you can, and I will say to you, I used to be a public school teacher. I don't actually think you can do worse in some instances. I'm an educational therapist on the side, and I work with a lot of kids who've been pulled out of school because the school wasn't meeting their needs. So you are the parent, you love your child more than anyone else in the world, you know them better than anything, and with a little bit of work and a little bit of research, you can do it, and you can do a pretty good job. So believe in yourself, take that leap of faith, and just do it, because you won't regret it. It's awesome. I don't regret one day of homeschooling my kids. I still have 2, one in middle school, one in 9th grade, and I still love it after 20 years. I'm probably a little bit crazy, but I still love it. So just, you can figure it out. There's tons and tons of resources out there. There's all kinds of people to help you. You just need to know where to look. So the first thing I would say is if you're getting ready to pull your kid out, if you've already done it, start doing your research, figure out about the diagnosis. If you have one, just read books. The library's full of people, parents, who have written books about how to help a kid, dyslexia, dyscalculia, auditory processing disorder, autism spectrum. There's so much stuff out there. Just read. You will learn so much just by reading. Talk to other parents who have been through it, but I can't even count the number of books I've read just to do the research to help my kid. So I think that's the first place to start. If you don't have a diagnosis, but you suspect something is going on, get a diagnosis. A lot of us as homeschoolers were kind of anti-government. I know, I'm there. So I didn't want to go through the school system, but I just went and found a private doctor to do it. I think it's a lot of times you suspect something, usually you're right, but it's really good to have it down on paper, and a lot of times the specialist is going to pick up things that you might have missed. But you actually need that diagnosis. If your kid is going to take a standardized test, they need accommodations, and they're entitled to them legally. If your kid's going to go to college, they need those accommodations. Most colleges will bend over backwards to accommodate your child. Most co-ops will do the same thing. So you want that documentation. If you decide, I'm going to homeschool till 8th grade and then put my kid back in school, you need that documentation to put them back in school so that they get the services that they want. So I was one of those moms who was not going to get a diagnosis because I didn't trust anybody and I didn't want a paper trail. And I regretted it and ended up having to go take a 14-year-old who was not happy with me to be getting tested so late. So just do it. No one's going to violate your privacy if you do it privately. So don't wait on that. While you're doing your research, explore what type of services you think your children might need. Some kids need occupational therapy, physical therapy. You might need a reading specialist. You might need a math specialist. Just do that research to see, because there are certain things that you're not able to do yourself without training. For example, if you have a child who's dyslexic, you need training in order to remediate the reading issue. It doesn't go away. It doesn't get better with time. It needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed by a specialist, or you need to go get the training yourself, which is what I did because we just couldn't afford. A lot of these services are, $80 an hour, so a lot of times that's why you need to do the research so that you can know how to help. And there are a lot of things you can do yourself, but it really just depends on what you're dealing with. So just make sure you do your research. There's all kinds of things. Are you going to medicate? Do you need it's some kind of intervention. Are you going to be, does your health insurance cover? Because health insurance covers, a lot of health insurance will cover physical therapy, will cover occupational therapy, some autistic services for kids who are on the spectrum. So just do your research and find out. And the public schools will also provide some of these services. I'm new to Florida. I moved here from Virginia in August, so I don't know the system really well, but I know in Virginia we were entitled to speech therapy through the public school if you couldn't get it privately, because it can add up. So just do you know how that works in Florida? Okay. I don't really know. So
I'm going through that right now, and one of the therapists that we're working with, she mentioned Step Up Florida, that they, I think it's like $7,500 a year, and you can use that for the therapy services. But if your child attends public school, they will not give you that money for those services. So it has to be private and homeschool.
Okay.
Family Empowerment Act.
Yeah, that one.
My child has the formally Gardner.
I know that. I always call it Gardner.
I
have a hard time
type it in.
changing my to family.
Yeah, I'm going through that.
Yeah, so there are also a ton of homeschool moms who are, like I was a speech pathologist before I became a mom, that's not me, I'm saying that's somebody else. I do reading intervention services on the side. So there are a lot of us who went through this with our kids, and then, we're like, well, we might as well get certified because, we kind of know what we're doing at this point. So there's a lot of that. It's very affordable compared to what you would pay, through a hospital or through private services. So just do your research. And again, you'll find it tends to be a very small community of homeschool moms. We all know each other. We all know who's doing what, and we can just all kind of refer. So if you ask around, you can always find usually you can find what you need, or get a referral to somebody who's good and maybe is affordable if you have to pay everything out of pocket on your own. I don't know if anybody mentioned HSLDA to you today.
Yeah.
HSLDA, it's the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and they provide all kinds of special needs services. They have consultants. If you're a member, I think it's $100 a year. You can set up an appointment with one of their consultants, and their consultants will sit down with you, and they know so much. They've just got so many connections that they can kind of point you in the right direction, get you in touch with support groups, co-ops, groups that will help you with your specific issue that you're having with your child. So I do highly recommend them. I recommend them anyway for anybody who's homeschooling, because you can really just pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm having this issue, and there's someone there. Most of their consultants are homeschool moms, so we've all just kind of been there. So I don't work for them, but I happen to have friends who work for them. So I do highly recommend them. I think that's something good. And I don't know if anybody mentioned going to FPEA, to the conference. That's always really good. They always have people there who offer services, who set up tables that you can talk to. You can look at curriculum and just get some ideas. You can always talk to people who have been in your place, but are a little bit further along their journey. So I recommend that as well. So my big thing that I would say as a parent of a child with special needs who's homeschooling is find a friend who gets it, okay? Find that friend who is going through the same thing that you're going through, or has the ability of putting themselves in your situation, because you're not always gonna find somebody, but it really makes all the difference in the world. Because let's say you've got a child who's prone to meltdowns, right? Who can't transition from one activity to another, right? Like, sweetie, it's time to leave the park. Well, that's not what they do, right? So they're, throwing themselves on the ground and having a meltdown. That there's something going on, and you've got the other people yelling at you. It's a discipline problem. Don't put up with that. You need to put your foot down, right? You need somebody who you can call in tears and say, okay, most embarrassing meltdown I've ever seen at the park today. But she gets it, right? So she can talk you off the ledge. You don't need to stop homeschooling. It was just a bad day. You know what I mean? My husband was that one, because I would call him in tears and be like, I'm totally screwing your middle child up. And he would be like, no, he was already screwed up now. Just say, no, it's fine, you're fine. But he was my biggest supporter. So find that person. It doesn't have to be another homeschool mom, but just somebody who gets what you're going through. A lot of times from the outside, people mean well, and they give you advice, and they don't really know what they're talking about. Like, I mean, my favorite one was everybody in my family would say to me, there's no way, like I have 4 kids with dyslexia, okay? There's no way you can do this. You don't know what you're doing. You can't do this. I mean, I heard that constantly. My in-laws were my biggest, like, this is crazy, you don't know what you're doing. Well, I knew they weren't gonna get the help that they needed in the public schools because those reading specialists aren't actually trained in dyslexia. That's not how the training works in schools and colleges. So I knew they weren't gonna get the help, and I was like, well, I guess I'm just gonna have to figure it out on my own. And it was like, if your grandfather asks you to read, don't read. Just come find me and we'll make up an excuse. It was terrible, but I had friends and my husband who supported me, and I probably would have given up if I hadn't done that. And all of my kids are reading now. So had I listened to them, I think it would have been a much rougher road. So just find somebody that will support you. That just makes all the difference in the world. Do you have a question?
Would it be a disadvantage not to have custody of the child that you're going to be homeschooling? Like, I'm a grandparent, I'm not a parent.
I think it depends on the situation and how much support you're getting. I mean, I know I've seen situations where one parent's pro homeschooling and then the other parent isn't, right? And that ends up in a big court battle because one parent wants them to be homeschooled and one parent saying, no, you're not qualified to do this. They need to be with the experts. So I think it really just depends on your individual situation.
About legally in the state of Florida?
I don't know. I'm sure that the courts have something to say about that. But I've never, I haven't been in that situation, so I don't really know. I do know I've read, court cases on HSLDA's website about parents who were fighting over whether the kid was going to be in school or not, but I don't really know. So, okay, let me see. Okay, so one of the things I would say too is if you're just pulling your child out, there's always a period of kind of de-stressing and detoxing them from being in school, and it's a very different experience. They've gone from having someone tell them what to do every minute of the day to total absolute freedom, right? And even though you're giving them schoolwork, it's nothing like what they were doing in school, right? Like one of the things I see, like I was the director of our co-op in Virginia, was the kids that were coming out of public school really didn't know how to manage their time because they were so used to, they had to ask to go to the bathroom, they knew what time lunch was, they knew how long lunch was, they weren't faced with free time, and that's one of the great things about homeschooling, but it can also be the downside if you're not used to having all of this time. So be patient with your child, because not only are they dealing with the learning issues, which a lot of times causes anxiety, right, and makes them feel I'm not like everybody else, something's wrong with me, and then here you are trying to figure out this whole homeschooling thing, right, and it can be very stressful. So be patient, just kind of watch them for signs of stress, anxiety, frustration. They say, to give them a certain period of time to de-stress from school. I think you kind of, I don't know that I'd say it's a year or anything like that, but just, kind of gauge, looking at your child, how much time you're going to give them to adjust to this. It's a new lifestyle, right? It's completely different from something that I went from being a high school teacher to being a homeschool mom, and it was very different, So just be patient. Let your kid know that you believe in him, right? And be his biggest cheerleader. He's going to have bad days, but honestly, whatever your issue is, by the time everybody reaches 18, they've figured it out, right? You might not be a math genius, you might not be an amazing reader, but you're reading, right? You're doing math, you're whatever it is. So it's a marathon, but when you're in 4th grade and you're really struggling to read, you as a mom are going, oh my gosh, like what am I doing? I'm screwing this kid up. You're not, it's just taking a little bit longer. So give yourself some grace and peace, and just know you're gonna get there, and it doesn't always feel like you are, right? But you will get there. So just pass that on to your child too. One thing I would say is teach your child about his diagnosis. If he's got dyslexia, explain to him what it is, explain to him what it means, teach him how to advocate for himself. Like if he's in a Sunday school class and the teacher's always going around asking everybody to read and that's causing anxiety, have him mention to the teacher quietly, can you not call on me, or whatever it is. If you have a child with an anxiety condition and they don't like to speak in public, then ask the teacher not to call on them, but teach them to explain to people too, because you're not always going to be there, right? And I mean, I was in situations where my girls came home crying because someone had asked them to read a Bible verse and they were mortified, and they just had to say, I don't feel comfortable reading. And nobody's going to be like, what's wrong with you? Why don't you want to read? You know, so just teach them to stand up for themselves, which can be hard. But once they understand why they need to do that, I think they usually get it. Explain to your child that they're not stupid. They just learn differently, because having a learning disability is not an intelligence thing. I mean, yes, there are children who are intellectually disabled, but if you are dyslexic, or you're on the autism spectrum, or you have dyscalculia, or you have auditory processing disorder, there's nothing wrong with your intelligence. You just have a different way of receiving information. So they need to know that they are smart. They just aren't like everybody else, or they just need things presented in a different way. And I think that's really important, because a lot of kids internalize that as, I'm not smart because I'm not reading yet, right? And that's absolutely not the case. And if you talk to adults who were dyslexic and were never diagnosed, or who had a math disability or whatever it is, they'll say to you, especially for those of us that are older and did school before they had all these accommodations, I knew something was going on, but I didn't know what it was, but I just knew I had to work harder, or I had to, and they figured ways around it, and so I've met people who said, I didn't know I was dyslexic, but when I went to college, I chose a major that required little reading because I knew reading was hard for me, right? So kids are resourceful, and they will find ways around it, especially if you teach them where their stumbling blocks are, right? Like if you have dyslexia, you're probably not going to be an English literature major, right? But maybe you're going to be a PE teacher, right? Or maybe you're going to teach science, or maybe you're going to be an engineer, right? So they do have gifts. They just need to find where they are special. So definitely encourage that. And also, I mean, we have all this freedom as homeschoolers. Tailor their classes to what they're strong in. So if you have a kid who's really strong in reading but not in math, load up on the reading part, right? Or load up on the math if that's their strength, or load up on science. We have like this, this is what you need to do to graduate, but there's a lot of ways around some of that. You don't have to take biology. Why can't you take marine biology, right? If you take chemistry, if you like to cook, why can't you study the chemistry of food? There are so many ways where you can tailor stuff, get around some of the stuff that they struggle with. If you're doing a literature course, make all the books audiobooks. Nobody says you have to sit there and read the book, page by page. Why can't you listen to it, There's tons of curriculum that have accommodations, that have the entire book on audio, if you need that have, larger print for kids who might have a visual impairment. So you just really have to kind of know where to look. And that's why I recommend going to a conference, because a lot of times those people will kind of be off in the corner because they don't have all this money, but they have this kid who had this issue, and there's a market for that. So just kind of walk up and down the aisles and see what there is, because there's so much out there. So, and then, I was talking about college, but a lot of kids aren't college material, and I'm actually working with a student right now who has a pretty profound math disability, and he's a mechanic, and that child can pick up anything and fix it, sewing machine, engine, lawnmower, cars, whatever. Well, he's found a way around his disability, and he's amazing, and he's making $25 an hour at 17, fixing engines on the side, because that's just his gift, right? So I just think he's a classic example of what you can do when you're resourceful and you don't let people tell you that you can't do something. And I have no doubt that he's gonna, be super successful as an adult, just because he figured it out, and he just figured it out by his dad giving him old parts in the garage, and his mom letting him sit out there and tinker with stuff, and he's finally figured it out. So it's kind of neat. Okay, so one of the things I think is super, super important is accommodations, okay? And accommodations are when you are adapting your teaching to your child's learning style or to their disability. Accommodations are not cheating. People will say, well, that's cheating. It's not cheating. You are helping impart that knowledge on your child. So for example, if it's hard for your kid to read the text to them out loud, or get them an audiobook, okay? If, let's take Apologia Biology. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Apologia, but it's very dry and kind of painful. There's lots and lots of reading each week. And most kids who have a reading disability will cry by the first paragraph, right? Because it's just, Well, there's an audiobook, or how about you sit down and read it to them, read the text to them, and they can take notes. Because when you do something like that, you take the stress off of them figuring out what they're reading and having to process all this, and free them up to just listen and actually learn. So there's a lot of stress involved in going through that process if that's something that's hard for you. And what you find is, a page in, they're in tears and they've just fallen apart. Whereas if you read it to them and let them just take notes and fill out the worksheets, you've taken all that stress off, and now they're just free to enjoy the fact that they're learning something. Same thing with math. Don't hand them a page of math with 45 problems and say, do this in the next hour. Right? I mean, it happens all the time, right? It happens all the time. I say to parents all the time, why would you even give him that? That stressed me out and I could do it, right? Pick 6. If he can do 6 of them, he can do 40 of them, right? He doesn't have to do all 40 of them. Or let him pick them. There's 40 problems on here. You pick 8, right? Circle them, and those are the ones we're going to do. Now, if you get one wrong, you have to pick a new one to show me that you know how to do it. But if he gets all 8 right, he knows what he's doing, right? And you've taken all that stress of, oh my gosh, my mom just gave me 2 hours of math, right? And turned it into a 30-minute exercise, and he's mastered it and showed you that he knows how to do it anyway. And that works for anything. It doesn't have to be 8 hours of work a day, right? That's what they do in public school. We don't need that. You can get a science lesson done in 10 minutes sometimes, right? Or you can listen to an audiobook while you're driving to go visit grandma. You can squeeze things in. You don't have to be sitting, working and just, so I guess don't try to do school at home. Remember that you needed 8 hours a day if you were in public school because there were 40 other kids in your class, and the teacher had to spend a little bit of time with each of you, and that was the only way they could corral all those kids into a 50-minute period. When you're homeschooling, you don't need to do that. You just want to get through the information, but there's many, you can do it standing on your head, right? You can do it laying on the couch. You can do it at grandma's house, whatever. So just remember that and try to make this an experience of homeschooling rather than what you think you should be doing. You know what I mean? There was something I was going to say about that, but I can't remember it right now, so it'll come back to me. Okay. If your child has, let's say, an auditory processing disorder and they don't process stuff well, hearing it, write it down, right? Give them cheat sheets. Like, for example, long division is always a problem for kids who struggle in math. Give them a sheet where you go through the steps, use color, right? Show them how to do it. And when they're doing long division, why can't they pull that out? There's no reason why they can't, right? Let them use it. Do it with multiplication, with division. Terms in math. What are exponents? We'll have notes. These are what exponents are. Here's an example so that they don't have to sit there and go, oh great, she's gonna get mad because I don't remember. Just pull out the notes and look at them. Some kids have trouble with their memory, right? That's their disability. So accommodate them in that way. I would say try to stay away from standardized testing if you can initially, because that's where that triggers all that stuff, and you can't bring those notes in there. But you don't need standardized testing to know if you understand the science lesson, right? You don't need it to know if your kid's doing math. You can see, you're sitting right there with them. You can see that they know how to do it. They're reading to you. You can see if they're making progress in their reading. So be creative in your assessments, I guess is what I'm trying to say initially. And we can't avoid standardized testing at some point, but initially take that stress off and just let them be happy to learn. Most kids love to learn. There's a few that don't, but most kids love it. And you're just really freeing them to enjoy the process rather than see it as a stressful experience. One of the things, especially for kids who struggle with anxiety or have reading issues, is give them frequent breaks. Don't make them sit for an hour and work. Make it 10 or 15 minutes. And then, go jump on the trampoline for 5 minutes and come back. It changes everything. It really does. It takes away the tears, it takes away the stress, and there's no reason why we can't do 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes in the afternoon, right? We don't have to do it all right now. You have your schedule, and I'd like to be done with school by 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but, we can start something at 9 and finish it at 1, So just be flexible, and I think a lot of times these are the things that change the number of meltdowns and the stress that your kids have and turn it into a happier situation. As far as assessments are concerned, you can make posters, right? I can do an oral assessment. I can say, hey, what did you think about Charlotte's Web? and you explained to me what you thought about Charlotte's Web. Well, I can tell if you read the book and you understood it, right? Even if I read it to you, I can tell if you understood it because you're telling me important parts. So that's a really easy way to assess. Tell Daddy about Charlotte's Web at dinner, right? Bring it up at the dinner table and you can see, or hey, let's talk about what you did in math today, or what's photosynthesis. Those are really easy ways to see if your child's getting it. Make a poster, make a cell with Play-Doh, right? Make cookies of whatever. I don't know, you guys remember when we did like the cells with cake in like 8th grade or something in public school? I remember doing that. There's so many different things you can do to see that can make it fun, but where you're actually testing to see if they understood without giving them a pen and paper, So just be creative. Talking about things, I think, is the best way. I think kids just like to talk about what they learned. They like to tell you. So that's a really good way to do it. So in public school, when I taught public school, we never finished our textbook. Never, ever, ever, ever in 10 years did I finish my book, ever. So don't finish the book. It doesn't matter, okay? You're not gonna die. The last 2 chapters of the book are gonna start the next series, and they're gonna go right over there. So you didn't get to them because it's May and you're finished. Be finished, okay? Or pick that book back up in the fall and say, it's really bothering me that we didn't do these 2 chapters, right? Because I have OCD when it comes to finishing a book, and then finish it, you know what I mean? But really, like, the math book is gonna go review everything that you did the year before, and there's your chance to do it, So I'm freeing you to cut off that last quarter of the book, okay? And with math, okay, math is always hard for kids who struggle because they might be in 6th grade and doing 4th grade math, right? Choose books that don't have grade levels on them, okay? There are many math series that go A, B, C, D, right? Matthew C. names it. They've got, their Greek names for it. If you have siblings and you have one sibling who struggles and the other one who doesn't, have them do different math programs. They might be in the same math, but they don't need to know that, right? And the books are different, and talk it up. Well, your book is special because you're better. I don't know, I'm being silly, but I used to do that with my kids. I had 4 kids in 4 different math levels because I was just trying to stop the fights, right? Because he's in 7th grade, I'm in 6th, and he's in a lower math, and you know what I mean? So just be creative with it. I mean, I remember downloading sheets, and I would go into my Microsoft Paint and white out the grade level and then print it out so that no one would know what grade it was. I mean, we're resourceful as moms. We're tricky like that. So be mindful of that because that's embarrassing, right? And it doesn't need to be. They're working where they should be. God made us all different, but it bothers them. So do what you can to not have that be an issue. Unfortunately, it's probably a little bit more work for you, but I think their self-esteem and their self-worth is worth whiting stuff out on a paint, app or something like that. So just think about that. Also, when you're talking about that, be careful with people who give you curriculum recommendations. If you have a kid with a math disability and someone recommends Saxon, run, okay? Like, run away from them because that's not a good recommendation. It's a great math program, but not if you struggle with math. It will make you cry every day. So, just remember, you're chatting with your friends at the park and they're like, oh, this was great. Keep in mind that you have a kid who learns differently and it might not be great for them. So you're gonna have to do a little digging and be creative in finding stuff that might work for your child, but it's worth it. And you might find too that like a literature course is gonna take you 2 years, right? Where someone else's amazing kid finished it in 4 months, right? Well, that's okay, split it up. They're still doing the work. So even if it takes a little bit longer, they're still doing the work. So just remember that. Okay, does anybody have any questions right now? I know I'm like throwing a ton of stuff at you guys.
I know you said, be careful of suggestions, but for children specific with learning disabilities, do you have any suggestions for math?
So
For high school.
Okay, I'm a big fan of Matthew C.
Matthew C.
Yeah, like it's math and then the letter U and then
Okay.
SEE. First of all, I like it because he doesn't do levels. He calls them like alpha is addition. The way he does it is alpha is addition, beta is all subtraction, then he does all multiplication, then all division. And then when he gets to high school, it's just pre-algebra, algebra, geometry, algebra 2. But there's only 5 days of work and there's like 10 problems a day, which I have found. And I do classes for kids with special needs math. I do those math classes, and I have just found it's not overwhelming, because 10 problems is not, it's not too much. There's a video that goes with it for you as a parent if you need to refresh your memory, but the kids can watch it too. So that's one of my favorites. I do a lot of going onto those teachers' websites and just pulling up worksheets, whiting out the grade level, and handing it to the kids. You know, I do a lot of that.
Okay.
So,
Thanks.
did you have a question?
I did. So do you teach the Math UC program to kids here?
Next year, I'm doing pre-algebra here. Yeah, so I do, so this year I'm doing algebra and pre-algebra online, with students online. So it just really depends on the year.
Have you had, so we kind of started with that. It seems like once you go down that road, like, that's a long time commitment, like, there's no.
It is.
Like,
It is.
There's no putting him back in school, like I have, this is my life for a
Yeah,
long
yeah.
time.
So if you get through the middle school with them, then yeah, it's fine because they know it. The reason I like it though is because you spend a whole year focusing on addition, which is just painful, right? As a parent, it's painful. However, your child knows how to add at the end of the year, and they have that skill down. And I think with kids who struggle, that's really important that they have that success because there's so much repetition that they really get it. And like with multiplication, division, my kids knew how to multiply and divide, and I spend a lot of time remediating kids who cannot multiply and can't divide, you know? So I really found that, but yes, it's not an open and closed door, like you're not going back into school because there's some serious gaps, you know? So you really have to be like, yeah, I'm gonna do this
Okay, so
long
like I
term.
heard her mention earlier, she tried Math UC and then Saxon and all of them, but really it's not, like, you start down Math UC, you're kind of there.
I think so. And everybody has their opinion too, right? And it really depends. I mean, I have friends who just die on the Saxon Hill, right? Well, I don't have those kids, you know? And yes, some of those kids are amazing. They're engineering majors. Well, that's great. None of my kids take one math class in college and call me every night to help them get through it. And that's the end. And we are not allowed to major in anything that requires math because it's just not our thing. You know what I mean? But we know that. We've been very upfront, like, sweetie, that's not your strength. Let's find something else. So it really, there's so much out there. I mean, there's probably 50 homeschool math curriculums. You know, there really are. And you can pick up a Horizons book and make it work if you're willing to split it up and circle the problems that they want to do and decide what they want to skip. You know, I mean, it's work, but yes, you can absolutely do it. You know, so it's really, and if you think that you're going to put them back in school, then don't use it Math UC, you know, really, because then they're not going to know how to multiply. They're going to be in a fourth grade classroom and not how to do it. You know what I mean?
She was already there, couldn't do it anyway.
Yeah. So you know what I mean? Yes.
Are you familiar at all with Right Start Math?
I am, and I really like Right Start. I think Right Start is a lot more manipulative based. I know it's based on the abacus, and I have done the research. My only issue with Right Start is that it moves very quickly, which is okay if you're okay with knowing, okay, we don't have that lesson, we've got to redo it, you know, and sometimes you have to go find your own resources because they've already done the worksheet that they're supposed to do. I think it's really solid in explaining math concepts, and Right Start just came out with a tutoring line. Have you seen that? Okay. I just actually bought it, where they work exclusively on multiplication, work exclusively on division, so where you would spend like 24 weeks fixing those holes in math, which I think is fabulous. So there's also Schiller Math. Have you heard of Schiller? Schiller is manipulative based too. Doesn't move as fast as Right Start. It's all hands-on, and if you buy their whole program, it's K through 8th grade. But I think those kids have a really solid grasp of math in a different way because they're figuring it out on their own without just being explained. You know, they're actually doing it. So that's a good one too. It's not cheap, but if you figure out for how many years you can use it, and if you're spreading it out over a bunch of kids, it actually ends up being very cheap in the long run. So check that out. Okay, so big thing with kids who struggle is structure, especially if you have a child on the spectrum who has anxiety. Don't let your kids sleep till 2 o'clock in the afternoon because they're homeschooled. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I mean, I guess it works for some people, but they really need to get up at a certain time. They need to go to bed at a certain time because tired is number one reason why they're going to have meltdowns, right? You can see it in their eyes. They come to sit down at the table to do math, and you can see they didn't sleep well, and you know instantly this is not going to be a good day, right? I mean, we've had those days, right? So structure is really, really important, but it's also really important because it reduces anxiety. It teaches them, well, this is what I'm gonna do at 10 o'clock in the morning. This is what I'm gonna do at 9, whatever your time schedule is, right? Okay, this is really hard, but I only have to do this for 15 minutes, and then if I get it done, I get to go, not my mom's gonna make me sit here for 2 hours and cry, right? So just be mindful of that, because I think you're setting them up for success down the road. Clear expectations, right? Let them know what you expect of them. You expect them to work hard. I expect you to try. If you really can't do it, say, Mom, I really just don't get this, and then we'll plow through, but give them very clear, markers so that they know where they're going. Deadlines. We cannot stick to deadlines to save our lives as homeschoolers, right? We can't have this done by 2 o'clock or else, and then 2 o'clock comes and goes and nothing happens, right? And then they go to co-op and everybody's like, wow, your paper's due December 5th, and December 5th comes and goes and no one did the paper because they don't understand, because we homeschool. We can do, forget it, we're gonna go visit grandpa today. Forget about your paper, right? So work on that, because it's really something that we struggle with, and I know because I do the same thing. So flexibility, be flexible. Sometimes you're working through a math book and it is just not gonna work. And unfortunately you spent $69.95 on that math book, and you're gonna have to go sell it on Facebook and buy a new one. And the new one's $79.95, and I'm really sorry, but it happens. I have shelves of math books, okay? And what I loved was I would have one kid and be like, this is amazing, I'm gonna use this with all 5 kids. And then the second kid came along and you're like, you sucker. Now I gotta start a whole new math series, you know what I mean? So that's just the way it goes. So just be flexible, and sell it online and recoup some of what you lost. Let's see. Okay, I think I covered all of that. Okay, so one more thing I want to say. Okay, so I know she was talking to you about end of the year assessments. Portfolio assessments are your friend. Okay, there's no stress involved. You just get to sit down with someone. You're going to tell them what you've learned. You're going to show them your kids' work. There's no standardized testing. There's no you worrying about, oh my gosh, did he bomb that? Is the state of Florida going to call me because he got a 2% on the math section? You are showing the portfolio person, and you showing your child, okay, this is where you started in September. Look at how far you got in May. But you're not comparing him to anybody else. You're comparing him to him, which is what he needs to be compared to, because he needs to make progress. It doesn't matter if he goes from here to here or here to here, right? Progress is progress. So just be mindful of that. There's some, you can't avoid standardized testing always, but be creative in the ways that you assess them to see how the year went. And let's see, there was one more thing I wanted to say. Okay, oh yeah, so I was talking about tailoring curriculum to interests, especially if you're in high school. If you have a kid who wants to be a cook, take cooking classes, right? Make 1 hour a week where they just cook a recipe in the kitchen. Let them do this hands-on stuff because it really sparks their interest. Take them to the library and check out cookbooks. They're actually still reading them, even though it's not, A Tale of Two Cities. It's a cookbook. It has words in it, right? It doesn't matter what you read. It just matters that you read. It just matters that you learn. So don't be afraid to take fun stuff, or, if you have a kid who loves animals, let them volunteer at the SPCA for 5 hours a week and give them a credit for it. There's value in that, and there's work value, there's learning about animals, you're learning to serve others, there's all kinds of stuff. So think outside of the box, and don't feel like you have to take 6 academic classes or you are not going to graduate. We are really good at coming up with really fun titles for some of our classes that no one has any idea what our kid actually did, but we put that on the transcript. And guess what? My kids got into college with that, okay? So I feel like no one looked, because one of my kids took kitchen chemistry where we learned, why does a cake rise if you have egg in it, right? Or what happens if we leave the baking soda out? We spent a whole year messing with that. And she got into college with that. So, and I called it kitchen chemistry, and I didn't sugarcoat it. I wrote that description, and no one asked me anything about it. So, don't be afraid to be creative. I think that might be, oh, I know. This is what I was gonna say. Okay, so 2 big things, exercise and limit screens. Exercise is so important. Go outside and jump on the trampoline, go ride your bike around the block, go sit outside on the deck and breathe fresh air. It changes everything, and it's really good for kids to be outside, get a little bit of vitamin D. It also gives them a break, de-stresses them. And screens. Screens cause anxiety. It's proven. It is a proven fact. And when you have a child who is anxious anyway, you are adding to that anxiety. And you're adding to it because they're on whatever, Snapchat, and someone's snapping them from their math class. And there's this crazy formula up on the board. And your kid's seeing it, and they're going, I can't even multiply those numbers yet. You know what I mean? And so now they're starting to compare themselves to what their friend who's the same age is doing. And that just adds to it, right? And it's just the whole time, try to have your school time be screen free. Like, okay, you can Snapchat your friends at 1, right? But from 8 to 1, it's just school. And if we're not doing school, then you're outside playing, right? Or you're cleaning the kitchen, or you're making your bed, or whatever. So be mindful of that, just because special needs kids are so much more profoundly impacted by screens and by peer pressure and just by feeling bad because they're not supposedly doing what they're supposed to do. So just think about that. Teach cursive, please. Make your kids do cursive. It's so good for their brain. It creates these neurological pathways. I don't know about the science. I'm not a scientist. I just know that when you send your kids to interventions, they make them do cursive. There's a reason for that, so make them do it.
Is there like an age limit? So I have from toddlers to a middle schooler.
Anytime.
So it's not
Because they'll make high school kids do it too. There's
Okay.
any time.
'Cause
It's
I
also
know-
important because they can't read the Declaration of Independence if they can't read cursive, right?
Yeah.
And I've seen kids say to their mom, can you read this letter from grandma she wrote in cursive? Why do you not know cursive? You know what I mean? And nobody does it anymore, but it's so important, so do it.
So like there's not like a curriculum you're going to, or it could be cursive from like a book I found at Costco.
Well,
that
it
just
could be.
teaches-
So if you, for just a regular kid who's neurotypical, anything will do. If you have a kid who struggles, there's rhythmic handwriting, which a lot of times has chants like oval, over, up, whatever. I'm not remembering all of it, but there's one called Cursive Logic, which I think is great, and it teaches them the chants to help them remember those letters. Handwriting Without Tears, I don't know if you guys have heard of that one. That's great. That's a great one. Yes, it's a great one. And I think you can, they claim you need the training. No, you can just pick up the teacher's edition and figure it out. Yeah, it's good. And then there's another one called Barchowski, Fluent Handwriting, I think, and she uses music.
What is it?
It's called Barchowski, Fluent Handwriting, something like that. But she, she uses music, and you do the handwriting to the beat, and there's just a lot of evidence that really helps kids. Music, piano lessons, amazing to help kids who struggle. Any type of music though, but piano lessons is fabulous. I don't know why, but it really remediates a lot of math problems. So.
Hi, people have been mentioning to fill in the holes, especially right after you take them out.
Mhm.
And so discerning where the holes are in what subject, and do you rely on your own intuition, or do you go
I do.
outsider?
So filling in the holes, I think really the only place that matters is math, right? Because filling in a hole in reading, just read, right? Just read the book or whatever. You might not have had this great survey of American literature or whatever. That's easy to fix. You can do that. Math, what I would say is as you're working through whatever math program you've decided to go with, you're going to see where the holes are because you get to a section and they're like, I have no idea what this means, right? So that's where you take a break from the book and say, okay, well, we're going to learn about exponents today, and we're going to spend a little bit of time on that because that was something that somebody missed along the way.
So are you gonna keep like anecdotal records on that in order to present it to the evaluator?
Well, so what I do is, for example, for math, every single piece of work that they do, I put in a notebook. So they have that whole notebook. So it's there, date it, put a date on there so you can say, for you and for the evaluator, but you can see back in October, we didn't know what exponents were, so we had to fill in this hole, right? So I think that's mostly where it's a concern because anything else is really easy to catch up with. Like you didn't have earth science in 6th grade, you're not gonna die. We can do it in 9th grade, right? I mean, that's very easy to fix, so.
The second question, the COVID thing. When I was grandma, I had 4 kids, 4 different levels, on screens,
Mhm.
in a classroom setting with Zoom. I almost lost
It was a disaster, yeah.
But, so if I say, we're gonna do school at home, they're gonna have a flashback, big time. So what are some tips for transitioning
So,
from school?
First
to
thing I
home?
would say is if they're all close in age, or reasonably close in age, you can do so much stuff together. There's no reason why you can't do history together.
During COVID, you couldn't.
Right, but now you can.
Follow
Yeah.
everything.
Right, and so, I mean, but COVID was funny because COVID really revealed to us how lacking our kids' services were. I mean, I all of a sudden had 5 kids at home, 2 in college, and now my kids were homeschooled anyway, but it was like, oh my gosh, what do we do? We're stuck at home. But then my phone was ringing off the hook, like, hey, Shelley, can you take such and such for math? Because, I was so busy that year, it was crazy, because I had neighborhood math classes going for, people were just sending their kids to my house, because they just didn't know what to do with their kids. So one of the neat things is you can do everything together except for math, really, and writing, You can read books together, and you can read A Tale of Two Cities, and the little one might not totally get it, but you're going to be shocked at how much they do get. You can do American history together, and some of the stuff might be over the little one's head, but everybody's doing it together, so you're not doing 5 different curriculums for every subject, which is overwhelming and not something that you can do. It's just too much, So combine as much as you can. It actually ends up being fun because, you've got the little one sitting on the big one's lap, and they're laying on the couch, and then you got another one playing with Legos, but it's weird because they love it. Like, they love to listen to you read to them. They love to, for you to tell them stuff. They love to do projects together, and you see that the older one's helping the little one put his little teepee together. You know what I mean? Just neat. And that's how we always did it, was everybody just did it together. So, any more questions?
Transition,
Well, so with the transition, like when I was saying, breaks, right? Okay, we're done with history. Go run outside for a minute, right? Or
from school to.
oh, well, there needs to be a period of detox, and I would say do some family stuff together. Don't just make it like a free-for-all, but maybe read some books together. Pick something that's do something fun. Pick a good book that everybody would love, like Charlotte's Web. I don't know. My kids all love that book, right? Read it to everybody. Everybody sit on the couch with me. We're all just lounging. We're reading this book. It's great family time, and it starts to train them to focus and to listen, and this is how it's going to be. 10 minutes of math, 15 minutes of math, right? And just build it up gradually.
Especially detox for the parents.
What if the other siblings are still in public school and he's the only one pulled out?
Well, then I actually think that would be amazing, right? Because he's going to have you all to himself, right? I don't know. And take field trips. Why do you have to read about it? Go, don't read about manatees. Go over to the Tico thing and see them, right? I mean, take a real quick book and say, let's find out about manatees. All right, now let's go see them. That is so much fun. Yeah. Let's go look for turtles. Let's go catch lizards, right?
And that's actually what spurred me to do the whole homeschool, is because my daughter had just been miserable. And I took her to WonderWorks, and that was probably the first time I've seen her genuinely smile and laugh in like the last 4 years. Like, she was so excited and probably learned more in that 2 hours we were at WonderWorks than she has in the last 4 years. So that's everything we're doing is field trips.
Yeah, it really changes their perspective. They also don't realize that they're learning. Like a trip to the zoo is amazing. And what I would always do was go get, with my kids when they were little when we did this, but we would read about tigers. Then we would read about bears, right? Just the little kids' books where you were talking about, bears hibernate or whatever. And then take them to the zoo for a day. And it was like, it changed everything because they had read about what they did and they were so excited, and you weren't at home,
And the education pieces at every place you go works.
Yeah, you get those little earphones, and they're, it's fascinating.
Or
and
the coloring book, or the,
it changes everything.
We love scavenger hunts.
Oh, yeah.
And if actually that online, that scavenger hunt app, we do that every time we go to a city. And she is the smartest, like, she figures out all the clues while I'm still trying to figure out what it is. And she's like, she just whizzes through it. Same with escape rooms. Like, I'm learning that is her gift. And she is a problem solver. Like, she can figure those things out.
Plant City has a really cool scavenger hunt.
Oh, do they really?
Yeah.
Yeah, so see, and that's a case where your daughter is starting to figure out the way that she learns, right? Because you've taken her out of that traditional. And so I didn't know, my husband's dyslexic. I didn't know that. And we were dating, and he says to me, hey, do you want to go to Chick-fil-A? And I was like, what is wrong with this guy? Chick-fil-A? Right? And I just looked at him like, are you joking me? And he never picked up on it, right? Yeah. I go, you mean Chick-fil-A? That's what I said, Chick-fil-A. I was like, okay, buddy. I married him anyway. But, you know, as I was going through, like, we started having issues with our kids, and I would be reading to him in bed, just he's like dying, like, please stop, you're obsessed. And I was like, I gotta figure this out. And he was like, you know what? That's me. And so, you know, then I started picking his brain, and he's, you know, he's done very well for himself. And I said, he's an accounting major, which is just so painful. I can't even imagine. Like, I can't even. But I said to him, why in the world did you major in accounting? And he said, because there's no reading. And it just came out just like that. And he had no interventions. He didn't know that he had dyslexia until our kids were diagnosed. But that was the first thing he said to me. And he said, I never knew why I worked so hard in school, but my friends would study for 5 minutes on the bus, and I was at home studying for 2 hours, and I would still get a C, and they would get an A. You know, and because we didn't do that back in the day, right? But now he does. I mean, it's funny because all I do is read, and he hates to read. And my kids are like, well, Dad doesn't read. And, you know, he's just like, wait, I don't have anything to say except I hate reading, you know? It's just, but he's discovered audiobooks, and that's changed everything, you know? So it's interesting because with no guidance, they figure it out anyway, you know, and you'll go find out people who are mechanics are like, yeah, I was terrible in school, but I can fix anything if I just look at it, you know? So, any more questions? I know I talked too long, I'm sorry.
It's kind of a random question, but like, so my son has dyslexia, so grade-wise doesn't match up with his age grade-wise, right? So, but I noticed that everything functions around what grade you're in, wherever we go. And then I always struggle, and then I'm like, well, if it's academic, should I put what he is in school? And if it's age-based, like sports, should I put, like, what would you suggest there? Like, I don't want to be in the sports, and he's a couple years older than everyone else.
Right, so yeah, no, for sports, I'd definitely put him with his age.
Yeah.
But even academically, so, you know, as a co-op teacher, and I've been teaching co-op for years and years and years, I always ask parents, please tell me if your child has a special need, right? Because we can accommodate that. If he's in 7th grade, he doesn't need to be with the 4th graders because that's his reading level. What he does need is for you to help him, right? And if we're reading and he has 4 chapters to read for this book, for this week, you might need to do the reading for him, right? And sit down with him. He still has the information in his brain after you've read it. You've just taken all the stress away from the reading part. So yes, you can put him where he is. Writing, and I forgot to mention this, if you're going to put him in a writing class and you know that that's something he struggles with, you do the writing. He dictates and you write. Write it as it comes out of his mouth. So if he says, we don't got no cheese, write that down, right? Because that's what he said. Don't fix it. But then later, go back and read it to him and say, hey, does this sound right to you? And he's going to be like, oh, that's crazy. Did I say that? Right? Or there's adaptive software where he can dictate to the computer. And I'm pretty sure Microsoft has that where you dictate and it does it, you know, as you go along.
So we are actually, didn't know this, but what she's been doing is on her phone, the notes, you can actually hit the microphone. So she just speaks into the microphone and it writes it all out. And that's how she's turning in her work.
Right.
Because she doesn't spell good at all.
And you know, and be mindful of learning styles and like if there's an auditory processing disorder, if there's a writing issue, because for example, if you have an auditory processing issue, writing is very valuable, right? So as you're listening to the teacher tell you what to do, or if I'm telling him about the Civil War, he's writing what I'm saying. Like he's just making notes because that's the way he's going to remember it because he's got an auditory processing issue. So if he's writing it as you're talking to him, you're channeling that into something that he's later going to be able to look at, but it also helps you remember, you know, when you write stuff. So things like that, you know, if they're going to use their notes, like, and they can even record lectures, right? If you're in class, you can record lectures, just make sure they go back through and read the notes after they're done. But all of those things those are accommodations, right? You're helping them. So it's not, I hate it because people will say, well, that's cheating. I hate that. It's not cheating. I'm helping him learn this.
Well, I think you brought up a good point of, because my daughter does have an IEP, and so, and she's got the diagnosis, specified learning disorders in reading, writing, and math. And so, I think it's a good point that you brought up that we also, as homeschool parents, should make sure we're adhering to those accommodations.
Absolutely.
Just like we would expect the public school teachers to do. So that's.
But you're also teaching them that that's what they need, right? So, you know, what my second daughter who's dyslexic, and my most profoundly dyslexic child, and who was thriving in college, and my husband and I thought for sure she was going to do a semester of college and come home. She's a junior, she's on the dean's list. I mean, she's doing amazing. Well, I didn't know this. She went into the writing center and said, I am dyslexic and I need help. And I had offered to do it for her, and she got so mad at me. I don't want those people to know, whatever. Well, she went and did it behind my back. But she learned how to advocate for herself, right? She calls me, she's an ROTC, she calls me and she says, Mom, I can't get through this, can you read it to me? And I'll read it to her on the phone, and she's on the other side writing notes. So that's the most important thing you can do, is teach them how to be their own self-advocate. Okay, well, I know I've talked way too long and I went over.
Quick question about accommodations. Do you know if the ACT and SAT have accommodations?
They do. You have to provide proof you have to give them a copy of the diagnosis, and they do. And usually what it is time and a half, which sometimes isn't adequate. Yeah, but and there's ways around that. If you have a kid who's not going to test well, then send him to a college that doesn't require it. You know what I mean? I know in Florida, you could do 12 hours of community college as a homeschooler and bypass that standardized test requirement. So dual enroll them in high school, and you can get around that. I don't have a kid who's taken a standardized test yet, and 3 of them got into college. So there's ways around. It's all about being creative. So last thing I want to say is you can do this, okay? God gave you that child for a reason. He knew that you could handle it, even though sometimes you don't think that you can. You love them more than anybody else does, and you want the best for them, which you cannot say about everybody else who's working with them. So just dig in, figure it out, and it'll be worth it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I forgot to pass the new homeschool package out earlier, so if you are a new homeschooler and want it, you're welcome to it. And Tampa Bay, gmail.com.
And Montessori is great because they're approaching the traditional school. The textbooks, like he doesn't have to read the textbook. They do more talking and discussion of content, and it works great for him for his learning difficulties. But our school is a great supplement to your homeschool and don't have the time to teach the kid every subject. So I did it, and he does it. He does piano and guitar lessons every week for us. But you can do but you could create a whole curriculum if you wanted via our school. And I'm just saying that because, like I said, I work full time. I can, but I'm trying to figure out how to balance kind of our homeschool. But our school had cursive. I was like, when it's telling you, that's where he first learned cursive. Just when we got a book and tried to go through, he's like, this doesn't make sense. I don't understand these arrows. So when we went to our school, I did a search, and it was a couple of people that had classes over like 7 weeks or whatever, or you can do like a club, cursive club. I could